going to tell us about the wonderful lesson she has prepared this time.
Well, thank you, Marco. Well, today we have a very interesting lesson prepared for you. It's about someone cutting in line.
Cutting in line, okay.
Yeah, it happens all the time and we all get very upset about it, but it happens.
Right. Well, I imagine that everyone is wondering what cutting in line is. Why don't we just listen to the dialogue one time, and then when we come back, Amira and I will gladly explain all the vocabulary in this dialogue.
Let's listen.
I can't believe it took us 2 hours to get here. The traffic in New York is unbelievable.
Yeah, but just relax, honey. We're here and we're going on vacation. In a few hours, we'll be in Hawaii and you'll be on the golf course.
Oh, no. Look at that line. It must be a mile long. There's no way I'm waiting for another 2 hours.
Honey, don't.
Hey, man, the end of the line is over there.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I was here first and you can't cut in line like this.
Says who?
I do.
So sue me.
All right, that's it.
Whoa, I think there's punching.
Yeah, I guess this guy he's just a crazy, impatient man, huh?
Yes, but we don't want to talk about this now. But for now, we will treat some of the vocabulary and very useful phrases in the dialogue.
Great.
So, Marco, do you want to start?
Yes, let's take a look at our first word would be unbelievable.
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 Exactly, and just how you say it, it's something incredible, something amazing.
Yeah, but I would like to point out that unbelievable was used here to describe the man's frustration. He's not happy about the traffic in New York.
Exactly, perfect. Okay, in the next part, the woman, she's trying to calm and relax her husband, and she says that they'll be in Hawaii in a few hours, and you'll be on the golf course.
Right, so we'll be in Hawaii and you'll be on the golf course.
Yes, we'll be in Hawaii and you'll be on the golf course.
So this is a great way of talking about your physical location in the future.
Right. So for example, Amira, tomorrow, where will you be?
Don't worry, Marco. I'll be in the office tomorrow.
Perfect, right? That's where I need you to be.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well, I have another interesting phrase here for you. Must be a mile long.
A mile long.
A mile long.
A mile long.
Now, that's basically not a mile. It's not a kilometer long, but it's another way of saying that this line is really, really long.
Right. It's just an exaggeration. Now let's take a look at there's no way.
There's no way.
There's no way.
There's no way.
Perfect. Let's listen to some other examples on how we use there's no way in a different situation, and then we can come back and talk about it a little bit more.
There's no way I can have those reports finished today.
The stadium is so crowded that there's no way we'll find a seat.
Do you think Michael's going to buy that house?
There's no way he has enough money to buy it.
All right, everyone. So there's no way is another way of saying it is impossible.
Exactly. There's no way you should miss this podcast, right?
Yes. Well, I have another phrase for you as well. Cut in line.
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 So again, we have some really good examples on how you could use this phrase in different situations. Let's listen to the examples and then we can come back and talk about it some more.
Excuse me, I'm really late. Can I cut in line, please?
I hate it when people cut in line at the bank. It's so rude.
I think it's okay when a pregnant woman cuts in line.
All right, everyone, cut in line.
Right. So from the examples, we can understand that it means when you are standing in line somewhere and somebody gets in front of you.
Right. I have another phrase for you here. Sue me.
Sue me.
Sue me.
Sue me.
Okay, now sue me is not a nice phrase. If you hear that, you know you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's kind of rude, I guess, to say sue me.
Right. Well, it actually means like taking someone to court and asking for money because someone has harmed you in a way. I think that we should listen to the dialogue one more time and try to figure out why he used that phrase and if he's really going to take him to court.
Vocabulary preview.
I can't believe it took us 2 hours to get here. The traffic in New York is unbelievable.
Yeah, but just relax, honey. We're here and we're going on vacation. In a few hours, we'll be in Hawaii and you'll be on the golf course.
Oh no, look at that line. It must be a mile long. There's no way I'm waiting for another 2 hours.
Honey, don't.
Hey, man, the end of the line is over there.
Yeah.
No, seriously, I was here first, and you can't cut in line like this.
Says who?
I do.
So sue me.
All right, that's it.
All right, we're back. Now, this guy, when he says sue me, he's just being rude. I mean, he's just being kind of
Impolite.
impolite and telling him, I don't care.
Right. Exactly.
Like you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Okay, today in the studio, we have a guest. Her name is Sarah, and she's from England.
Hi there.
Hello.
All right. So we're going to be asking her a couple of questions, and she'll be a frequent guest on our show, so you can expect to hear from her a lot.
Well, she didn't know that.
It's a surprise.
She knows now.
Well, Sarah, our topic today is about jumping the queue.
Okay, Amira, wait. What is this jump the queue?
It's the same as cut in line, but in British English.
Ah, okay.
Yes, queuing. It's very important in England. We're very proud of our queues. It's true.
So what would be the reaction of people if they cut in line?
I think we do take it very seriously. I'm laughing now, but it's quite serious. So you don't jump the queue. If people, jump in front of you, it's you get a little tuts and sort of, shouldn't be doing that. And we make it very obvious. And
so you say it out loud.
We would, perhaps say something. And we have systems, in London on the metro. On the underground, you have to stand on the escalators on the right and queue, and you can't jump in front. You have to walk on the left and queue on the right. And it's all very serious. There's rules and regulations.
Is there like a queue handbook that you have to read in high school and kind of take a test on?
Perhaps there should be, yeah.
Wow.
What about New York, Marco?
Well, no, definitely, I guess this dialogue is similar to a reality of New York. If somebody gets in front of you or cuts the line, somebody's going to say something and probably end up in a fight if the guy is rude. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, why don't you tell us, is there a line or a queue for almost everything in England?
It seems like we do just like to form a queue. Yeah. So,
Dialogue.
Can you think of like some other examples of where you would normally you wouldn't queue, but you do?
Oh, gosh. Things like in the supermarket when you're trying to find some vegetables or something, I'd never sort of reach round or anything. I'd sort of wait until that person had finished picking up their stuff and then go in. So just try and
So if like 5 people want to buy oranges at the supermarket, then you have a little mini queue of 5
maybe
people
a little bit. Just,
waiting.
There's no sort of just shoving through it to the front. You just don't do that.
So you don't stick your hand out and grab like a tomato.
Well, if you do, again, you would make sure that person knows. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just in a hurry or whatever. But yeah, it's just letting someone go before you. It's a courtesy, I think.
Okay.
It's quite important to us.
All right.
Right.
Great
Well,
stuff.
thank you so much, Sarah.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll have you back very soon. So, all right, we're out of time, but we'll be back tomorrow with another lesson. And be sure to visit our website. Don't forget that EnglishPod.com has many, many resources and also a community of users and teachers that can help you answer questions and interact with you.
Yes, and you should definitely leave your suggestions. But for now, I wish you all well and bye.
Bye.
The second paragraph of the dialogue.
All right, so today let's dive in something I think we've all experienced at one point or another, that like universal frustration of like, waiting in line.
Oh, yeah.
Only to have someone just casually cut right in front of you. We've got some great sources today that I think will help us kind of unpack all the cultural differences that surround this.
It's so fascinating, isn't it?
Right.
Like how such a mundane little act can like reveal so much about like a society's values,
Totally.
all these unspoken rules.
Absolutely. And our deep dive today is inspired by an English language learning podcast.
Okay.
And they use this really funny airport scenario to teach some useful phrases for expressing frustration when someone jumps the queue.
Oh, cool.
We'll also hear from a native English speaker about the sacred ritual of queuing in England.
Sounds fun.
So in this language lesson, we're dropped right into the middle of this chaotic airport scene in New York City.
Okay.
This couple's just arrived after battling some seriously brutal traffic.
Oh, I can imagine.
And the husband is like, the traffic in New York is unbelievable.
And they actually play a clip of how to pronounce unbelievable.
Oh, that's good.
Which is a nice touch for language learners.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting is that the podcast hosts emphasize how unbelievable can be used to express both positive and
Vocabulary
negative
preview.
amazement.
Oh, interesting.
Like, you could also say, the view from the top of the mountain was unbelievable.
That's a great point.
Right.
It highlights how the meaning of a word can shift dramatically depending on the context
Totally.
and the speaker's tone of voice.
Okay, so back to our frustrated couple at the airport.
Okay.
They're now faced with this ridiculously long line, and the husband throws his hands up and is like, there's no way I'm waiting for another 2 hours.
So the classic, there's no way.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating how that phrase can be so much more than just like stating a fact.
Totally.
It often carries a strong emotional charge.
Like a verbal eye roll.
Disbelief, defiance,
Yeah.
even a bit of outrage.
And the podcast actually gives some additional examples
Oh, cool.
of how you might use it in different situations. Like, there's no way I could finish this project by tomorrow, or there's no way she actually said that.
Exactly. It's all about expressing a strong conviction or skepticism. But here's where the cultural layer comes in.
Okay.
The podcast hosts point out that this kind of blunt, almost confrontational language might be more common in a fast-paced, individualistic environment like New York City.
Which brings us to the heart of our deep dive today.
Okay.
Cultural differences in queuing etiquette.
I am ready.
To get a contrasting perspective, the podcast features this guest from England named Sarah.
Okay.
And let's just say she has some strong opinions about the sanctity of the queue.
I love it.
And this is where the real fun begins.
Okay.
Because Sarah's perspective really highlights just how deeply ingrained queuing is in British culture.
For sure.
She actually uses the phrase jump the queue,
Oh,
which is the British English equivalent of cut in line. Did you notice how the vocabulary itself
yeah.
reflects a slightly different cultural mindset?
Yeah, for sure.
Totally. Jump the queue almost sounds more active and deliberate, doesn't it?
It does.
Like you're actually leaping over an obstacle.
It does.
And Sarah goes on to explain that in England, queuing is more than just a way to organize people.
Okay.
It's a social contract.
Yeah.
A sign of a civilized society.
I love it.
She even mentions how there are designated sides for standing and walking on escalators in the London Underground.
What?
It's like there's this unspoken queuing handbook that everyone in England gets at birth.
That's a great visual.
And what I find so fascinating is that Sarah doesn't just talk about queuing in abstract terms.
Right.
She gives these incredibly specific examples that really bring the whole concept to life.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like the one about choosing vegetables at the supermarket.
Yeah.
She's like, I'd never push or reach around. I just wait until the person in front of me has finished picking up their stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
I could just picture it, this line of polite Brits patiently waiting their turn to grab a handful of Brussels sprouts.
Totally.
But it really underscores the point that queuing etiquette in England extends beyond just the obvious places like shops and train stations.
Yeah.
It's woven into the fabric of everyday life.
It's amazing how something so seemingly simple can reveal so much about a culture's values.
Oh, boy.
In England, queuing is about respect, order, and a sense of fairness.
Whereas in the U.S., as we saw in that airport scene, it's often more of a free-for-all.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, have you ever encountered line cutting in your own life?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I think everyone has at some point.
It's that universal experience that sparks a range of reactions.
Totally.
From mild annoyance to full-blown indignation.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder, do different cultures have different thresholds for what constitutes acceptable line-cutting behavior?
That's a great question.
Are there places where it's barely even noticed, while in others it's considered a grave offense?
And I think that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing.
Right.
It's not just about learning a few new phrases.
Yeah.
It's about gaining a deeper understanding of how cultural norms and values shape our everyday interactions.
Totally. All right, let's get back to Sarah's stories. She gives this hilarious example of how even when choosing vegetables at the supermarket in England, people form these mini queues.
Oh my God, I love it.
It's so true. She says, I'd never push or reach around. I just wait until the person in front of me has finished picking up their stuff.
That's hilarious.
It's like this unspoken rule of politeness that permeates British society.
It's so interesting to see how those unspoken rules play out in everyday life.
Totally.
And Sarah really drives home the point that in England, queuing is more than just a way to organize people.
Right.
It's a social contract.
Yeah.
A sign of a civilized society.
And she even mentions how there are designated sides for standing and walking.
Right.
On escalators in the London Underground.
Oh my.
It's almost like there's a whole queuing handbook that everyone in England gets at birth.
Queuing handbook. I love it.
Right, and she's only half joking. Okay, now I have to ask you, dear listener.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this strict queuing etiquette?
Vocabulary
Do you think it's a sign of a
preview.
polite society? Or does it sometimes go too far?
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Share your experiences with us on social media.
Now let's shift gears a bit and explore another interesting aspect of the language lesson.
Okay.
Remember the husband's indignant sue me?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the podcast hosts explained that while it's not meant to be taken literally in this context, it does reveal something about his attitude.
Like what?
They suggest that this kind of dismissive retort might be more common in a fast-paced, individualistic environment.
Okay.
Like New York City, as depicted in the podcast dialogue.
Gotcha.
And they contrast this with the more community-oriented approach to queuing in England.
Right.
Where people are more likely to politely point out a line cutter's transgression.
That makes sense.
It's almost like two different social scripts are playing out here.
Yeah.
Each reflecting the cultural norms of their respective environments.
For sure. And remember, dear listener, these are just two examples from a vast spectrum of cultural approaches to queuing.
Of course.
In some cultures, line cutting might be seen as a sign of assertiveness.
Oh, yeah.
Or even resourcefulness.
For sure.
While in others, it could be interpreted as a serious breach of social etiquette.
Totally. The key takeaway here is that understanding these cultural nuances can help us navigate social situations with greater sensitivity.
Yeah.
And avoid unintentional faux pas.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural nuances, let's delve a bit deeper into the linguistic aspect of this line-cutting saga.
Okay.
Remember how Sarah used the phrase jump the queue instead of cut in line?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
This highlights a fascinating point about how even simple actions can have different vocabulary across different regions.
For sure.
Adding another layer of complexity to intercultural communication.
It's like a little reminder that even when we think we're speaking the same language, subtle differences in word choice can reveal a lot about our cultural backgrounds.
And those subtle differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings.
Yeah.
Or even offense if we're not careful.
So as you can see, there's a lot more to queuing than meets the eye.
Totally. It's a microcosm of cultural values, social norms, and even linguistic variations.
And with that, we wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of line-cutting etiquette.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore even more hilarious anecdotes and thought-provoking insights from Sarah's experiences with queuing in England. Welcome back to our exploration of line-cutting etiquette around the world. Before we delve further into Sarah's amusing observations about queuing in England, I think it's worth reflecting on something you touched upon earlier.
Oh, you mean the idea that different cultures might have different thresholds for what's considered acceptable line-cutting behavior?
Precisely. It's intriguing to consider whether there are places where line cutting is so common that it's barely even noticed.
Right.
While in other cultures, it might be perceived as a major social faux pas.
It makes you wonder if those cultural differences are rooted in something deeper. Like, are there historical or societal factors that might contribute to those varying perceptions?
That's a great question, and I think it speaks to the complexity of cultural norms.
Yeah.
For example, some anthropologists suggest that societies with a strong emphasis on collectivism, where the needs of the group are prioritized over individual desires, might have stricter rules about queuing because it reinforces a sense of shared responsibility and order.
That makes sense. It's like queuing becomes a visual representation of that collectivist mindset.
Totally.
Where everyone is patiently waiting their turn and acknowledging the needs of those around them.
Exactly. Whereas in more individualistic cultures like the United States, where personal ambition and self-reliance are highly valued, there might be a greater tolerance for line cutting. As it can be seen as a sign of assertiveness or resourcefulness.
It's like that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Right.
But of course, it's important to remember that these are broad generalizations within any culture.
Totally.
You'll find a spectrum of perspectives and behaviors.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so crucial to approach cultural differences with sensitivity and a willingness to learn. What might be considered rude in one context could be perfectly acceptable in another.
Okay, so let's get back to Sarah's experiences in England. She had this one anecdote that really cracked me up.
Oh, yeah.
About how even when choosing vegetables at the supermarket, people form these orderly little queues.
Oh, yes. She described it so vividly. I'd never push or reach around, she said. I just wait until the person in front of me has finished picking up their stuff.
Dialogue.
It's such a quintessentially British scene, isn't it?
It is.
But it also speaks to the point we were just discussing about how cultural norms can manifest, even in the most mundane, everyday activities.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the contrast between the more structured queuing etiquette in England and the more free-flowing approach often seen in places like the United States, where, as you pointed out earlier, it can sometimes feel like a free-for-all.
Right. Like during Black Friday shopping, for example.
Oh, yeah.
It's practically a contact sport. But speaking of contrasts, remember how Sarah used the phrase jump the queue instead of cut in line?
Yes.
I thought that was a fascinating linguistic distinction.
Me too. It underscores how even simple actions can have different vocabulary across different regions.
Right.
Adding another layer of complexity to intercultural communication.
It's a great reminder that even when we think we're speaking the same language, subtle differences in word choice can reveal a lot about our cultural backgrounds.
And those subtle differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings or even offense if we're not careful. Which brings us back to the importance of being mindful of cultural nuances, especially when we're traveling or interacting with people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. It's all about approaching those interactions with curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to learn.
Now, shifting back to the language lesson for a moment,
I
was intrigued by how the podcast hosts broke down the phrase, "there's no way," in such detail.
Oh, yes. They emphasized how it can express disbelief, defiance, even a touch of humor.
Right.
Depending on the context.
Exactly. And they provided several examples of how it could be used in different situations. For instance, they gave the example, "there's no way I can finish those reports today."
Right. And they even played audio clips of how to pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
Which is always helpful for language learners.
For sure.
But what I found particularly interesting was their observation that the use of such a blunt, almost confrontational phrase might be more common in a fast-paced, individualistic culture, like the one often associated with New York City.
That's a great observation. It suggests that even seemingly simple phrases can reflect deeper cultural values and communication styles.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder if there are equivalent phrases in other languages that convey similar levels of frustration or disbelief.
Yeah.
But perhaps in a more nuanced or indirect way.
I'm sure there are. Language is so fascinating, its ability to reflect the subtleties of human emotion and social interaction.
Totally.
But before we get too carried away with linguistic analysis,
All right.
I'd love to hear more about Sarah's experiences with queuing in England.
Oh, she had some real gems.
Oh, good.
Remember how she mentioned those designated sides for standing and walking on escalators in the London Underground?
Oh, yes.
She actually joked that there should be a queuing handbook that everyone in England gets at birth.
It's such a brilliant observation because it speaks volumes about how queuing is so deeply ingrained in British culture
Right.
that it almost feels like an official set of rules.
Right. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Sarah explained that this adherence to queuing etiquette isn't just about blindly following rules. It's about creating a sense of fairness and order in society.
It's like a social contract that everyone implicitly agrees to uphold.
Totally.
And it's fascinating to consider how that social contract might vary across cultures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this whole topic so thought-provoking.
Yes.
It's not just about line cutting.
Right.
It's about understanding the deeper cultural values and social norms that shape our everyday interactions.
Well said. And with that, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of line-cutting etiquette. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue to explore the cultural implications of queuing and share some more of Sarah's hilarious observations about life in England.
Welcome back. I'm still chuckling about Sarah's queuing handbook.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing how waiting in line can be like a cultural marker.
It is. It really makes you think about how these small everyday behaviors can reflect bigger values, you know?
Right. Remember how Sarah talked about those unspoken rules?
Yeah.
Even when choosing vegetables at the supermarket.
Oh, yeah. She said, I'd never push or reach around.
Right.
I just wait until the person in front of me has finished picking up their stuff. This is so much about politeness and patience.
Totally.
Respect for personal space. It's so ingrained in British culture.
It's not just supermarkets either.
Right.
She mentioned how this order and decorum extends to the escalators
Oh, yeah.
in the London Underground.
Stand on the right, walk on the left.
It's like a dance of politeness all happening without a word.
It's amazing how those rules become like second nature.
Yeah.
For someone from a culture where queuing isn't so formal,
Right.
it could be a real culture shock.
Totally. Imagine that American tourist
Oh, yeah.
in London, completely oblivious to the escalator etiquette
Uh-huh.
and accidentally causing a queuing pileup during rush hour.
Oh, no.
Talk about awkward.
It's a good reminder that what might seem like a minor faux pas in one culture
Yeah.
could be a major social blunder in another.
Speaking of social blunders,
Yeah.
remember how Sarah joked about the queuing handbook?
Yes, that was great.
It's like queuing is so ingrained that it's like official rules,
Right.
even
Yeah.
if they're not actually written down.
Totally.
But here's what's interesting. Sarah emphasized that this queuing thing isn't just blindly following rules.
Yeah.
It's about fairness, order, respect for everyone's time.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that we're all in this together
Yeah.
and we're going to be considerate even in mundane situations.
It's like a social contract that creates a more harmonious society.
I like that.
Makes you wonder if there's a link between a culture's queuing and its overall social trust.
Oh, that's interesting.
It'd be interesting to see if there's any research on that.
I'm sure there is.
But even without data, it's fun to think about these connections
Right.
and how our behaviors reflect deeper cultural values.
It highlights the importance of approaching cultural differences with curiosity
Yeah.
and a willingness to learn, not judgment.
So as we wrap up our deep dive,
Hmm.
I think the takeaway is this.
Okay.
Whether we're queuing for a bus in England or navigating the lines at a coffee shop in New York,
Mm-hmm.
we're all in this dance of social norms and expectations.
And understanding those nuances helps us navigate those interactions better,
Totally.
avoid those faux pas, and maybe even appreciate the diversity of human behavior.
And who knows, maybe we even learn some new phrases along the way.
Exactly. So the next time you're waiting in line, take a moment to observe those unspoken rules.
Yeah.
You might be surprised what you learn about the culture.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us.